So come along with me to my local Michael's craft store. This is where you'll find me combing the aisles looking for fun, new embellishments and accessories that you can add to your embroidery. What I'm looking for today is something that you can add to your embroidery to add a lot of dimension. I'm headed to the back of the store where all of the embroidery supplies, macrame supplies, other needlework supplies are found. These are by Loops and Threads, and they are Cabone Rings. Let's head back to my studio and I'm going to show you how I use these.
So I'm working on a dimensional piece of embroidery, and I wanted to add a lot of dimension, obviously, in the form of beads and stitches. There's going to be a lot of circular pieces on this embroidery, and so I wanted to show you how I am adding these wood rings, which can be used for macrame. That's actually the aisle that I found them in at Michael's. So let me show you what it looks like when I add them. So this is a section of my piece right now. This is from one of my Inspired by Imagery projects, and I'll do a whole behind the hoop when I finish this, and I'll show you the inspiration for it and everything. But this is what it looks like after I've stitched this to the fabric. And so today I'm going to show you how easy it is to stitch a dimensional piece like this to your fabric, and then I'll show you what I'm going to be filling it with too. So I find that thicker threads definitely work better for this. It's going to take you a little while to stitch something like this. So for this, I used a yarn. It's a needlepoint yarn. I love the beautiful variegation in the colors. It's just a very slight variegation that you can see when this is stitched. This has slightly more color in it, but I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like stitched up. I also used that for this section here. I bought this at a yarn shop. It's by Karen. So I have it threaded in my needle. For a yarn like this, you will want a needle that has a larger eye, and once you have a needle like that, it's really easy to thread this. And so I'm ready to get started. I think I might stitch one of these up here because I'm going to be doing some larger pieces throughout too, and there's 5 or 6 of these in a pack. I think there's 5 in a pack. I don't know if I'm using all of them yet, but I do want my circles to be nice and close together. So I think I'm going to stitch one right about here. So depending on the yarn or the thread that you're using, you can either stitch little, like 4 or 5 little guides to, or I call them guides, but really they are just couching stitches to hold this into place to make it easier to stitch it down. With a variegated thread, I don't know that we're going to notice much of a difference in color because the color really is very all over the place with this. So I definitely am going to do that with this piece. So I'm just going to be bringing my needle and thread up, and then it's very close to the outside of this wood piece. And then I want to take it inside. I'm not taking it directly down, and I'm going to try and show this to you on the video. I'm kind of going down, but to an angle, so that I'm going under. I'm taking my needle like under the wood piece of this hoop. I want these to be really nice, tight stitches. And so these first stitches that are going to hold this in place, I want them to be very tight and hold this exactly where I want it. So already with one stitch, it's going to be easier to do the rest of the stitches because it doesn't need to be held in place as much. I am starting from the outside on all of these stitches and going to the inside. And remember, the first few stitches, your hoop is going to move around a little bit. You can see that because it's not completely stitched down. So I'm holding it in place, taking my needle, kind of going at an angle underneath the wood hoop, and then pulling my thread down. You will be going through a lot of yarn with this one. I recommend a thicker yarn only because it does take a while to stitch all of this and to make sure this is all covered. Oops, I'm starting from the outside. And you just want to make sure you don't see any gaps where you would see the wood through. So a thicker yarn will help you cover it up quicker. It will also help you to not see gaps through your piece. These stitches that you are adding right now will also help you to keep your threads all in the same direction as you're stitching. Instead of filling up an entire piece as you're stitching this, you're really working from section to section. And so it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming. And it feels like you can keep your stitches a lot neater that way. This is the same sort of process I do when I'm couching a larger area, or even when I'm satin stitching. I'm laying out like my foundation, my areas that are going to be filled in with stitches, and having it broken down into smaller bits, even though they're not even. You can see they're not even. Having it broken down into smaller bits just allows you to focus on that little section, and it fills in nicer that way, I feel. So now that I have all of my guidelines down, I'm just going to pick a spot. I'm looking at my color. I'm just going to pick right where I ended. And I am going to be taking my first stitch. Let's see. I'm going to try and show you. It is very, very close to this stitch that's already there. I'm not coming up through that stitch or that hole, but I'm coming up super close next to it. And I'm still going to be taking it down at a little angle inside the hoop. And I'm just directing my thread where I want it to go. And so each new stitch that you make, you just want to make sure that it butts up nice and close to the previous stitch, so that it fills in nicely. And you can push them closer together as you stitch. You just want to make sure you're not leaving any gaps. So I'm going to keep going with this all the way around. Okay, so two things I want to mention. First, when you get to the end of whatever length of thread you have, the way that you end it is, you can see I only have a tiny bit left. I'm just going to take my thread and run it back through just a few of my stitches. And I'll just do it like once or twice, sometimes 3 times, depending on how much thread I have left. I don't have a ton left right here, but I just run it through, and then you can trim the end and start again. The other thing is that when you are using a variegated thread, and this is kind of what I was saying before, when you're using a variegated thread and you're putting down these foundation stitches or the stitches that are holding the wood circle in place, the one thing you do need to keep in mind is that if you want the variegation to look even, and you don't want, let's see if I can find an example, like you don't want red going on either side of the green, you do need to just be mindful of where you are in your variegation and your stitches. And so you might have to work in shorter lengths of thread. With this one, it worked out perfectly. I had I think 1 or 2 different foundation stitches here, and they actually worked out really well. With this one, I'm just going to have to look at my thread and determine where I need to start, and I might cut it a little shorter, just so that I can keep it looking even and I don't have any of these foundation stitches that stand out when you look at it from a distance. So just keep that in mind with a variegated thread. Well, here is what it looks like all stitched up. That yarn worked into an absolutely beautiful circle here. I loved it here, and I think I love it even more here because you can really see the variegation. So this is a fun way to experiment with thicker yarns that you might have. As long as you can thread a needle with it, you can work it around a project like this. And then when you're all done this, I wanted to show you what you can add. So from here, I'll try and show you from the side. These are stacked beads, and I have a video on that too that you can check out, and you can see how to add stacks of beads to your project. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you give this a little try. Maybe you can find something to add it into in your embroidery, and if you do, happy stitching!